What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing the incredibly strange Manhattan transfer abduction. What do you all first think of when you think of an alien abduction? Most people, myself included, think of some far out of the way place, maybe in the middle of the woods, and perhaps on some isolated farmhouse somewhere, some unfortunate person being visited in the dead of night while they're sleeping most likely and being somehow transported into a UFO craft and then waking up with no memory at all of the whole ordeal. Perhaps there are false memories or shields, and maybe the memories return after a while, or maybe they don't. I mean, how about when you all think of a UFO being in our atmosphere, a ship in the sky looming above another far out of the way place near some long ago abandoned house somewhere in the middle of the woods and in the dead of night, too far off from civilization for anyone to hear or see anything. These are both mainly the case for each respected phenomenon. However, every so often I come across a case that makes all of it seem even more strange because of how the incidents take place and even where they do. There is this spectacular tale of a woman who was abducted in plain sight of who knows how many witnesses in the middle of New York City through the window of her apartment. If you believe it, this is by far one of the strangest ever to be substantiated and put as part of official record. Let's jump right in. On November 30th, 1989, 41-year-old Linda Napolitano, formerly Linda Corteil, was living in an apartment building in Manhattan in New York City. It was incredibly early in the morning and still dark outside when Linda opened her eyes to find a strange-looking humanoid figure standing in her room by the foot of her bed. Her husband was sleeping soundly next to her, and the only door leading in or out of the apartment had been locked up tight before they went to bed. Manhattan back then wasn't like Manhattan 10 years ago, and it was crime-ridden and in the midst of the crack epidemic. Linda says this creature was a non-human extraterrestrial entity that took her out of the bedroom and into some sort of examination room. The room wasn't unsimilar to what we are used to when we go for a checkup, only much larger and brighter. She remembers opening her eyes while on this examination table and being surrounded by alien creatures, the ones we know today to be the Greys. They had thin, very large heads and gigantic black eyes. Within another blink, she was back in bed next to her still soundly sleeping husband. Her memories were completely broken and fragmented, and try as she may, she could never put all of it together. She was sure of one thing though, and that's that it was definitely not a dream or hallucination. This didn't help much, however, because back then people were not encouraged, as we are now in this community, as the community barely existed, to talk about such things as abduction and alien encounters. Linda eventually came across a book though, and everything was about to change because of it. The book she found was Intruders, The Incredible Visitations of Copsley Woods by Bud Elliott Hopkins. The book is about an alien abduction, one which we only very recently discussed here on this channel, and after skimming through the book, she decided that what she had experienced had been 100% real and that she was no longer willing to try and talk herself out of it anymore. She was ready to get some answers, and I really can't blame her. Bud Hopkins was very eager to hear Linda's encounter story and even set her up with a hypnotic regression therapist due to her inability to remember anything but scraps of time during the event. Under hypnosis, our witness would say that she had been taken from her room out her bedroom window. She was levitated out, as a matter of fact, and taken then through the air and over the glaring lights of a city that never sleeps, in the middle of the night and out of the comfort of her own bed and far away from the ears of her almost comatose husband, directly into a spaceship that was left hovering outside in the air near this giant apartment building. Once she was inside the ship, she was then put onto that examination table where she remembered seeing all of the Greys surrounding her right before she woke up in her bedroom. This is what she had to say of it, quote, "I'm standing up on nothing and they take me out all the way up, way above the building. Ooh, I hope I don't fall. The UFO opens up almost like a clam and then I'm inside. I see benches similar to regular benches and they're bringing me down a hallway. Doors open like sliding doors. Inside are all these lights and buttons and a big long table. I don't want to get up on that table. They get me on the table anyway. They start saying things to me and I'm yelling. I can still yell. One of them says something that sounds like Nuboyeg. I think they were trying to tell me to be quiet because he put his hand over my mouth." End quote. As incredible as all of this is, it's not really much compared to what happens next. A little bit later, after helping Linda recall what had happened to her, Bud Hopkins was contacted by two men calling themselves Dan and Richard, who had a very strange experience on the very same night of Linda's abduction experience. The two men claimed to have been bodyguards who on that night were assigned to escort a very high-ranking diplomatic official. It's later been surmised that this official was none other than the United Nations Secretary at the time, General Javier Perez de Cuellar, but it's never been substantiated as fact that this was who the high-ranking diplomat was. Back then, it could be detrimental to your reputation and political career should you be mixed up in something like an alleged ET abduction, even if only as a faraway kind of witness. On that particular night, they were driving the diplomat over the Brooklyn Bridge in a limousine. The vehicle suddenly stalled, and as it did, the men in the car all spotted something terribly disturbing. In the sky, hovering right above what would later be surmised as the location of Linda's apartment, they then took it even further and claimed to have seen a woman levitating through the sky along with some non-human looking creatures. All of them entered the craft simply by floating up into it. The craft then allegedly moved faster than anything they had ever seen towards the East River and plunged down into it, disappearing from sight. Though he didn't come forward, Dan and Richard insist that the diplomat they were driving that night saw it too. There was no doubt about it either, despite his insistence in the other direction later on and his refusal to join the men in coming forward with their story. Richard explained by saying, quote, "There was an oval-shaped object hovering over the top of the apartment building 2 or 3 blocks up from where we sat. We didn't know where it came from. It happened too fast. Its lights turned from a bright reddish orange to a whitish blue coming out of the bottom. Green lights rotated around the edge of the saucer. A little girl or woman wearing a white gown sailed out of the window in a fetal position and then stood in mid-air in this beam of light. I could see 3 of the ugliest creatures I had ever seen. I don't know what they were. They weren't human. Their heads were out of proportion, very large heads with no hair. Those buggers were escorting her into the craft. My partner screamed, 'We have to go get them!' We tried to get out of the car but couldn't. After the woman was escorted in, the oval turned reddish orange again and whisked off," end quote. The men said they were in shock and completely disoriented as to what they had actually just seen and what they should or shouldn't do next. These 2 men, whose real names we still don't know, somehow found out who the woman they had seen that night was and began to become obsessed. They stalked her day in and day out, wanting to know what had happened to her and why. They were consumed with her and with finding answers. They took things very far when they decided to kidnap her themselves. They abducted her. On April 29, 1991, Dan and Richard allegedly kidnapped Linda Cortiel in order to grill her for information on her abduction. It's strange in that there isn't much more information on this alleged abduction, like what took place and how Linda took it all. Were the men ever arrested? I don't have those answers, but Dan apparently decided to kidnap her again after this, for a second time. He forced Linda to wear the exact same nightgown she had worn on the night of the alien abduction, and Linda has held firm in her claim that wherever he took her, she saw files with the CIA insignia on them lying all over wherever it was Dan had taken her to the second time. Linda continued to be harassed and stalked by these 2 anonymous men and was reporting all of this to Bud Hopkins, who watched it play out and was more confused than ever before as to what in the world was happening. This is, admittedly, a very strange and bizarre case. It gets stranger still, though, so let's keep going. A woman who called herself Janet Kimball came from out of nowhere and contacted Bud Hopkins to tell him she thought she had witnessed the abduction of a woman by aliens on a cool November night in 1989. This woman is usually called by her alleged last name, so I will be referring to her as simply Kimball from here on out. Kimball said her car had broken down somewhere in the vicinity of the hovering craft, and that she had seen a woman and some strange beings floating out of a window and into the craft. However, it being New York City and all, she just figured someone was filming some sort of science fiction movie, and it was off in the distance and gave it no further thought, at least not right away. Hopkins really wanted to keep this case private and quiet until he had more information. But once Kimball also came forward as a witness to the abduction events, he decided to go public and see just how many people may have witnessed it. He even reached out to the diplomat I named earlier, who it's alleged was the one that was there that night. Now, this is according to Bud Hopkins. The diplomat did in fact admit to seeing the abduction exactly the way his bodyguards for the night had said they had all seen it, but he was in no way, no shape, and no form willing to have his name publicly associated with any of it. He proclaimed he would deny it all and didn't want to speak about it ever again, especially and specifically not publicly. Apparently and quite obviously, skeptics were coming out of the woodwork to poke holes in not only the abduction claims themselves made by Linda, but also of the veracity of the witnesses and also Bud Hopkins' investigation. There are a lot of holes, but I'd like to lean more towards believing someone who claims to have been through such a horrific ordeal, so I'm going to hold off just for a minute on the skeptics. Through the years, many alleged witnesses to the event have come forward. One of the most prominent of these is a man named Yancey Spence, who claims that at the time he was a journalist for the New York Post and had been in his office, which was right across from Linda's apartment building at the time of her abduction. He claimed she wasn't the only one to have been abducted, but it's anyone's guess as to who these other people allegedly were. The skeptics say if there were more people abducted, then more would have come forward, but riddle me this. What if they were just never returned, and that's why nobody but Yancey Spence believes they exist? Linda's abduction has come to be known as the Manhattan Transfer Abduction, and to this day, all these years later, it's still unclear what actually happened here, if anything. Here's what the skeptics and non-believers have to say about all of it. The most notable skeptics were Hopkins fellow researchers George Hansen, Richard Butler, and Joseph Stefula. They pointed out the failure on Hopkins' part to carry out some basic checks as to the weather on the night in question and failing to interview the security guards in Linda's building. These guards were later interviewed and claimed to have seen nothing out of the ordinary that night. Another questionable thing was why this allegedly happened at a huge apartment complex in the very middle of the downtown area, which stays busy all night long, every single night, yet there were seemingly no additional credible and or substantiated witnesses. None of the other tenants in the building saw anything strange that night either, or so they claim. Let's look at the witnesses we do have. Two men, neither who will use their real names and who it was never checked if they had a prior relationship with the alleged victim to see if this was all an elaborate plot and scheme for 15 minutes of fame concocted by the three of them. Also, the diplomat who supposedly agreed to what he had seen in private, but who wouldn't allow his name to even be used in relation to the case, and who, allegedly, says he would deny any and all claims that he had seen anything at all. The vague Kimball, and one other alleged witness who Linda claims was a truck driver who was also on the Brooklyn Bridge on the night in question, but who has never been named or publicly come forward. Yes, indeed, it's all very vague and seemingly evasive. There are theories, though, that perhaps the ETs who were involved that night realized their mistake and did a major mind wipe on almost everyone who saw anything, and that's the real reason why no one remembers seeing anything that night. Could it be that the men in black went completely terrorist and started threatening those who the mind wipe didn't work on to ensure their silence on the matter? I really and honestly had no clue at all as to whether or not this all actually happened and why. It seems a very huge risk these beings took by abducting this woman so very publicly. I mean, after all, it's New York City and not some rural farm in the middle of the country. The most intriguing thing to me about all of this is the allegations that the ship went into the depths of the East River and didn't shoot off into the sky. I've been coming across more and more information lately that there are very real bases for extraterrestrials underwater in the depths of the oceans and the bottom of lakes. I believe it, but let me know what you guys think in the comments below, please. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me and spending this time with me. Subscribe if you haven't already, and spread the love by sharing this video. On Wednesday nights from 7:15 to 11:15 p.m. Eastern Time, you can catch me in Ghost Dragons doing live Intuitive Oracle. You come on in, I pull one card, give you a reading for the week for free or donation of your choice. Speaking of donations, if you would like to make one to this channel, PayPal, Cash App, Patreon, and Amazon wishlist gift link where you can donate decks, crystals, statues, whatever is on my list. I don't even know anymore. I lost track. There's thousands of things. Everyone who donates financially or your time or gifts or whatever it is, I really do appreciate you guys. Your donations are my only paycheck at the end of the month, so I do definitely appreciate it. Come on into Wednesday night chat if you would like a personal intuitive oracle from me. Please hit me up at GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com or MoonBearOracle@gmail.com. Manifestation and intention sprays, spiritual helper boxes, friendship boxes, all the things that are going to be available on my website: moon water, sun water, tar water, war water, and crossing spray, all of the things that I charm, mix, and make myself. I would love to talk to you guys about it if you want to purchase something, but the website will be up within, so hopefully beforehand, a week and a half. So yeah, hit me up. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Always be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. Always go in grace. Smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.